Hello and welcome to part 9 where we're now going to texture this temple object. You can see here I've pretty much opened this where we left off and we've got our UV map here which is done and dusted, so I can close this window down now, and I have my complex checker map just previewing the orientation and tessellation of my temple UV. So at this point I need now to send this over to the paint room, which in effect is our texturing room. So first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to just send this object over and just to see what happens to the object if I don't do anything to this object and just send it over as is. To do that, I'm going to go to the Bake tab here in the modeling room, and I'm going to choose this option here, which is no baking. So this isn't just, it's just going to take the model as it is and just throw it over into the paint room. So let's choose that option. It's going to ask me for some parameters in terms of the map size, etc. So I don't want anything, I'm not really interested in the map size. This is just a demo at this point. So I'll just say OK. Okay, that's done. Let's now jump over to the paint room and check out our model. I'll turn off wireframe mode using W, and you can see that when it brought that object in, the normals aren't quite right. It's tried to round out the normals on this object, so it doesn't quite look how I wanted it to look. So we can change those options, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to just show that very quickly. It's because sometimes you can just send that object over and it's like, well, that's not how I wanted it to look. So it is possible to set the sharpness of the edges inside the modeling room. So let's delete that object now. So I'll just delete these objects, and that will clear that baked object that we sent over into the paint room. That will clear it out, so there's nothing actually left in here. Let's jump back into the modeling room now, where we get our UV model back, and let's try and sort out those edges on this map. To do that, we need to go to Select on here, and we can go down here, and we will choose, I think I've gone past it, sorry, make sure edges are selected, that's right. And we can use this option here called Mark as Sharp. Now I can go through this and I can kind of like manually select, and if you notice, let me just take off the complex checker because it's getting a little bit difficult for you to see what I'm doing. So I'm just going to go for no checker, which means it just takes away that map. It's a little bit easier to see, hopefully, the edges that I'm selecting. So anything that I'm marking as sharp, in my case, because I've changed this color, is yellow. But you can change your the selection colors inside the preferences. So I can go in here and I can start to mark the seams that I want to be sharp on this. Or let's just undo that, because that'll take a bit of time to do that. I can kind of try and speed this process up by select sharp. Now on this one, if I use this little dialog here, you can see here there's an option here for the crease angle on here. See that? And it kind of does, based on this degree here, this angle, it kind of selects most of those for me. If I just go around and inspect, that looks pretty good. So let's just use this option. So I'll say OK to that, and I'll come down here and I'll say mark as sharp. So everything that was selected on here, I'm making sure that's all marked as sharp. Right. Now let's do the same process again. Let's go to our bake and go over to here where it says retopo per pixel, no baking. Exactly the same settings. We'll say OK. Let it do its thing. And now we'll jump over to the paint room and check out our results. So that's an improvement. That's a lot sharper where I wanted it to be sharper. There's still some problems around the top here. Let's just change that so we can see. But you can see here as well that this kind of works in a way where it softens out. For example, here, if I hit W on my keyboard, what I was going for here on this step was that it was a kind of like a worn out, broken kind of step there. So if I move that away, by softening the edges on there and having it less sharp on there, you can kind of imply that this was worn out to a certain point where lots of people have been walking up these steps and gradually worn that edge out on there. And maybe with the weathering on the top of the building here has caused that to wear out. So there are instances where this can help, and not setting as many edges to sharp will be a kind of like a good thing in terms of your model. In this case, I'm going to pretty much make sure everything is sharp on it. So let's edit this a little bit first. So let's get rid of this test object and just delete that one. So I clear the paint room again and jump back into the modeling room. So I've still got my edges selected here now. So I can come into, I'd use my select with edges selected down here, and I can just go in and start to select the ones I want. So by holding Alt down, I can remove ones, and just by clicking and selecting, I can now start to select the ones that I want. So at this point, the only ones that I'm going to leave here are this one. I might just do that there and just leave that corner just smoother on there. Okay, so that's fine. Let's just click mark as sharp just to make sure that all the selected edges are marked as sharp. And let's go to the same option and we'll choose no baking. Now this time I think I'm just going to up this to 4K. So I'm making sure my my map size is going to be large enough in terms of its resolution. Hit OK, and now jump back to the paint room and we can see our results. So that, I think, is okay. I'm quite happy with that result there. Okay, so now we have the object inside the paint room. I'm finished with the modeling room. So it's important to understand the relationship between the modeling room and the paint room. So we've already discussed things like the UV and the orientation and tessellation. And we'll see the rewards of making sure that those were done correctly in our UV stage. But it's also a very powerful part, the texturing inside of 3D-Coat. So it's good to see how that work kind of pays off and how easy it makes our life in the texturing process. Speaking of textures, one of the things that I'm going to use for my texturing is the materials, 3D-Coat's material scans. So I'm not going to use all of them. I'll create some other ones, but I'm actually not going to go too much into the texturing because that needs a whole section by itself. But I will be using various ones inside these. So if you have your license, you will have 120 credits, and then you can download these to follow along if you want to. So with that said, let's get started. Okay, so inside the paint room, your UI may be slightly different than mine. This is the way that I prefer to work. But all the options, all the windows that are available in this view that you can see here, you can access those by the windows, panels, and then all those windows that you can see are kind of in here. You just have to arrange them in a way that works for you. The main window that we need here is the layers window, and you can see here I've got my first layer, which I've double clicked on and called it base, and this essentially is my grey color that you can see. But we've also got a full set of blend modes that we can use, and also we have these sliders which work on a per layer basis. So the opacity here refers to the color information, the diffuse or the albedo, I suppose. We can change those, but it's also the same for the depth, the gloss, and the metallic opacity. So here we can see that we can change those sliders and reduce the amount of depth on any given layer that we create. Down here at the bottom we've got our textures, and these are the ones that I've downloaded from the 3D Scan store. As I said before, we're not going to really look into texturing that much. I've got these, and these are all prepared for me just to demo this texturing part of the tutorial series. And I've also got some other ones like these old bronze ones, and I can put the link in the description where you can download these from too. So the next thing is here, I need to create some base maps on here for me to use these properly. And it's always a good idea to go in and get these out of the way first. So I'm going to go over to textures here, and I'm going to bake out an occlusion map and a curvature map. And all these textures here will be relying on those to display correctly. So if I clicked on this, it would ask me if I wanted to create those automatically, but I'm going to do it first and just get them out of the way. So the first one I'll do then is the curvature, and I will leave these at default. Actually, I will just increase the anti-aliasing samples on this one to 16. This will take a little bit longer, but it's worth it in the long run. So I'm just going to click OK, and then I'll return when it's done that. Okay, so here we have the final maps being created, and we had a cavity map and an ambient occlusion map. If you remember from this menu here, there's the occlusion and the curvature. So if we turn on the cavity map first and have a look at the results of that. These are 4K maps, by the way, so they are taking a little bit of time to load. So there's my RGB curvature map, and I'll just turn that one off and then turn on the ambient occlusion map, and we can see there's the ambient occlusion, and that's been set to multiply. Okay, so those two maps are important, and once we've done them, then they're out of the way. So the next thing we're going to do is create a base map down here. So I'm going to use this texture here for that process. And when I click on that, I automatically get two little mini windows come in. First one is this control panel for the texture, and the other one, which is collapsed at the moment, is this preview window, which kind of previews if you move the mouse outside of the area. It will preview the texture. There it goes. You can see it's starting to do it. It's quite slow, but it does have its uses in certain cases. Once it's built it, I think it speeds up a little bit after that. So you can see at the moment that's how this texture is being projected onto here, which is not very good at all. So let me just reduce the size down. Actually, just turn it off. It's very slow. Okay, but just remember we are using quite 4K maps on this, so it's taking its time to kind of build that. And if we use this control panel here, notice that we've got this setting. It's saying UV mapping, and we can change this to different mapping types. So here I'll just scale this down until we get something like this. So I'm getting this preview of how this texture is going to look on my model. So I'm not going to go too crazy with it, because if I go too far you can clearly see the tiling on this image. So I'll just do something in this sort of region, and once I'm happy with that, I will then just click on OK. I'll just click on Fill, and I'm going to fill this base layer here. So I'll just use layer, fill, layer, and I'll just hit yes on there. And there it goes. So it's now placed that texture on as my base object. And if we just zoom around, we can look inside, just check everything's okay on there. So there's my base texture completed. Now, one of the important things with this, let me just close this down now, I don't need that anymore. One of the important things on this is to notice that all my channels here are actually turned on. If I wanted to turn a specific channel off, I can use just toggle that on and off like so. Another view that's really important here is this one, where we have the ability to just move between our different or view our different map types. So for example, if I want to see purely the normal map information on here, I will check relief, and there we can see a kind of a look at the normal map information on my model, and I can change that to a flat shade where it will just show me the color information, and gloss and roughness only, and there we go. So based on the map that I chose on here, so it's just showing me and isolating those channels for me to just analyze and see what those look like. The most useful one in this case is going to be this one, because we're going to do a little bit more work on this map. So let's return back by going to smooth shade, or number 5, and that gives us a sort of composite of those different channels there. So that's that layer now sorted. So you can see with this our base map here that it's quite coarse and rough in terms of the texture on there. So what I want to do is make another layer here of a smoother, same sandstone type of effect going on, but a smoother version of that. So in my layers window here, I'm going to hit the small plus sign, and I'm going to change this one. So I'll just say smooth outer on this one. So this is the outer side of this texture, and I'll click on this texture here to select it, and again I can scale this one. If you notice, when it's coming in really small. So here we have this one. So now I can start to preview how this one is going to look over the top. So I've opened up my preview window there, and let's bring this one down. And for this one I may change the mapping on this one. Actually, it's not too bad. So here I'm adjusting the scale. I can move this with using this icon here next to it, or I can rotate these on the maps, or I can actually sort of squash and stretch them over here. So at the moment the scale is probably working okay. I don't want things to start repeating on there, so let's just drop this texture on. I'll say something like that, and then again with my smooth outer selected, I'll hit fill and fill the layer. So with my textures being placed on their respective layers, if we zoom in on this object, we can see that we get quite a horrible result really in terms of the relief on this texture. And the reason for this is that we're actually multiplying the bump of the base layer through to the smooth outer layer. And this is a bit of an issue because it just makes it too noisy in terms of the texture. But there is a way around this, and let me show you how I solve this issue. First of all, we'll switch our view over to the relief only, which gives us a bump representation of our maps. And the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm just going to turn off the base layer by clicking in this small icon here just to hide its visibility, which will leave us with the relief of the smooth layer only, which again you can see it still looks far too noisy. So let's start by just reducing the depth of the smooth layer to 15%, because this is our finer rendering in our in terms of the kind of stonework, and this is supposed to be a more of a smoother texture over the rougher texture of the base layer. So by reducing the depth down to 15%, I get a much better result in terms of the smooth outer layer. Now, if I add the base layer again, watch what happens. So now by clicking on the base layer, what happens is the base layer relief pokes through and spoils that nice smooth effect that I had on the smooth layer. So to solve this issue, what we do is, I'll just turn this base layer off again. We use clipping masks to help with this situation. So here I am back onto the smooth layer at 15%, and if I take an eraser now, and I'll use a hard alpha brush with a hard brush setting on here, if I just start erasing, sure enough you'll see, let's just take that symmetry off, sure enough you'll see that I erase the smooth layer, and because I've got the base layer turned off, there's nothing else under here for it to show other than this base grey colour which is on this layer here. So we've got nothing actually here underneath this smooth layer. So as I erase, I'm just revealing a blank layer underneath because it's turned off. And then obviously once I turn this layer back on again, you can see that I've erased kind of this portion here, but it doesn't look like there's anything erased at all. It's just back to basically where we were at the beginning. So this is where the clipping mask comes in. So if I select the base layer here and I say choose the smooth outer layer as my clipping mask. Now this is kind of what we wanted, but it's a flipped version. It's an inverted version of what we want. Unfortunately, underneath the clip mask layer title here, we've got this invert the clip mask. So if I invert this now, we get this result, which is exactly what I'm after. So if I go back to my smooth layer now and I start to erase, then I'm revealing more of that rough texture underneath the smooth, which is the effect I'm going for. What you can see now is not only that depth information has been created, but also I'm bringing through all those color. So if I change the view here to flat shade, you can see on the flat shaded view that over here I've got those that rough texture coming through, and then I've got my smoother sandstone on top. So this is a really good way of layering your textures, not only in terms of the colors but also the depth as well, and using this view here to switch between so that you can see exactly the effect that you're looking for on here. Based on what we've just discussed, what I'm going to do now is make sure my eraser is selected, and I've got one of these alphas selected down here. These are some of the default ones, and I'm going to have a look over my smooth outer layer here and just pick points where I want to reveal that base texture underneath. So for example here, where we've got this rougher type of texture going on, I can erase this and bring in more of that base underneath. So let's do that now, and we can see here that we've done that. Oh, I've got my symmetry on there. Let's just turn that off and just undo that. Make sure my symmetry is off. I don't want it to be symmetrical on both sides as I erase, because it won't look too good. So here I've got this dark area here which I want to erase. So let's do that. So now I'm just going to lightly tap onto here and bring in some of that base texture underneath. It's very subtle, this is, but yeah, it's okay for what we're doing. And we could do this down in the corners here. We can start to erase this one where it would wear down here. Again, this isn't really a texturing tutorial, so we can do another tutorial on creating much better textures than this one. But this gives you the idea. So I'll just carry on and we'll speed the video up. Revealed a lot of damage now on this temple, and it's probably a little bit overboard, but it's just a little bit of fun for this tutorial anyway. But we can see that we've now got that nice smooth sandstone, and we've revealed a lot of erosion and decay where that rougher texture is now showing through. So at this stage you can see we've got our texture work done in terms of the sandstone, and what I'm going to do is just check what this looks like. So I'll use the render room to do that, which will give me, I've got some lights set up in here just to give me some information about how these normals are working. So if I hit the real-time render in here, I can assess how that erosion is kind of looking on here. Like I said, it's a little bit over the top, but for the purposes of this tutorial, it's fine. So for now, I'll turn that off, jump back into the paint room, and continue on to the next stage. So I'm going to just turn off these two layers for now, and I'm going to create a new layer here called stone. Move over to my folder here where I've got this texture of this stonework. So if I click on this texture here, and once that's loaded in, I'll use my magnifying glass here, and I'm going to just scale this down. I'll change from UV mapping to cube mapping on this one. Scale that back up, something like this. And I'll use the polygon paint tool here, and I'll start to paint that texture onto this wall here. So first of all, let's correct the depth on this because it's far too heavy. So let's drop this down again. Let's try 60% for this layer. Probably more 40. Now these are quite coarse rocks on this, so but it still feels a little bit too much. Okay, we'll leave it at that. Okay, so what I'll do now is just close this one down. And with those two created, I'm going to now do exactly the same thing as I did before. Only this time I'm going to reveal the stonework underneath the base layer. So if I enable these two again, it should completely cover this stonework that I've created, which it does. And you'll notice that we get in that same multiplied look of the normal map underneath. So we need to make sure that this is that this one is going to be clipped by the upper one. So we'll do that now. We'll choose clip mask layer as the base, and then we'll invert that one. So that one now removes that stone bump map. So what I'm going to do now is choose the eraser again, go back to softer brush, choose my alpha, and if I now go in and I start erasing the base layer, I should start to reveal the stonework underneath, like so. So now we can see that our stonework is showing through, and we've got this base layer, the greyish colour base layer, and then we've got that smooth sandstone over the top of that. So we're really building up the layers here and the effect that we're trying to achieve with this. Now, if I erase this top layer here, the sand layer, nothing's going to happen because I can only reveal the stone layer through this coarse, rough texture of the base. So anywhere where that shows through, like down here, for example, I can reveal that. Now, the reason it's not being revealed here, if you remember, is because I only painted the stone area here in this section and on the embossed part around the edges. So let me just undo those sections there. So in order to get that stone showing through here, what I have to do is I have to go to the smooth layer first, start to erase this layer, like so, which reveals the base, and then swap to the base, and then I can reveal the stone underneath. And that gives me a kind of a really nice feel to it, where it's not just a very simple color texturing of these particular polygons. I'm getting a little bit of variation here in the textures just by erasing, and I'm choosing where to erase. So for example here, if I don't want the stone to be seen, just that base texture, then I can do that by selecting the smooth outer. Let's just wait for it to finish auto-saving, which gives me that ability. So what I'll do is I'll just go around here now and just finish this off and join you once it's all done. Okay, so at this point now, I'm kind of happy with that. Again, just drop back into the render room and hit real-time render and just have a look at that work. So that looks fine. The stones are showing through nicely. Alright, so what I've done here is just change the base, and I've just repeated what we did all the way around here, around this embossed part here, and I just painted the stonework on this platform area, and then used the same erasing etc. techniques that we did to create this section here. I just felt it needed that little bit of contrast, a little bit too much of the sandstone, and these bricks help to break that up. So what I'm going to do now is just do a little bit extra work on the outside, and then we'll move on to the interior. So the first thing I want to do is I want to give us a sense of reveal on this object in terms of what's inside. And to do that, I'm going to use this sort of top section here. So I'll change over my smart material to this bronze material here. And I'm going to make a new layer. Call this one bronze. And this layer, I'm not going to do the same technique again because we've already done that quite a few times. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the brush tool here. And I'll use the same alpha, I think, on here for now. But I will just choose this bronze material here. And I want to try to make a little bit of a reveal in this section where we can see some of this bronze. And it'll give us an idea of kind of what's inside the temple. Just to add a little bit of a story to it type of thing. So let's reduce this one down something like that, just so I can get these square panels nicely showing through. So I've got the size right, I've got the position roughly where I want it. Now remember that smooth outer has been eroded here to reveal base layer, but now I'm putting this bronze layer in between. So now with my bronze selected as a smart material here and with white selected here, I'm going to start to paint the bronze material in here. And as I do so, you can see that bronze has started to come through, but it will only be revealed where smooth outer has been erased. So that's why that's showing through. So anywhere here will start to show me that bronze material. Now it's not revealing it as it did before. This is just painting directly into this layer, and then because this one's got basically holes in it, it's showing through. So it's the same effect, it's just a different way of doing it really. But the advantage of this is pretty much what we were trying to eliminate, funnily enough, in the other videos, and that is when I paint outside here where it's not revealing, what is revealing is the normal map. And that's what I want in this case, because I want this bronze relief to kind of show up underneath the sandstone, and it gives a sense of kind of story as to what's been hidden underneath these layers here. So as I keep painting, anywhere where there's holes on smooth, my bronze is coming through. But also, in addition to that, I'm getting this embossed feeling on the sandstone, which looks really nice. So it's giving me a sense of story behind what's here. So as I keep doing this here, I'll just continue all the way to the edges. Now, at this point, two things are happening. It's giving me the effect that I'm after, which is great, but it's a little bit too much. And these areas here are too contrasty. So because I'm using this technique, I can go back to the eraser tool and I can start to soften those areas out by using a softer eraser on here, and also varying my alpha brushes as well. So here, for example, I'll go over to maybe a small alpha here, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to erase my painted areas. So I'm just going to go in here and soften these edges up by erasing them. And at the same time, when I paint over the sandstone, I'm actually erasing those areas too. Let's just increase the strength of the eraser here. Now, it's probably too subtle to see on the screen, but I am actually removing the embossed relief of that bronze material that I painted on, and just reducing that down and just leaving it where it slowly transitions into the actual material underneath. You can probably see it here more where I'm erasing it. Okay, let's check that work now in the render room. So you can see there already, even before we render, there's something metallic underneath there. So if I render this out now, it's very subtle. but when we do some renders, that'll come out nicely. Maybe a little bit too deep, the relief on there, so might just drop that back down a little bit. And also, I can also reduce the amount of specular that's on there as well. So over here you can see I can reduce on my bronze layer that I was painting. I can actually reduce the depth as we did before. Let's reduce that by half. And I could also reduce the metallic, but I'll try to just reduce the gloss on there, and maybe a little bit of the metallic just as well. Let's check that out. Yeah, I kind of like that. But if you can see here in this zone there, you can see a little bit of that embossed area coming out underneath the sandstone. So that looks quite nice. Just looking at it at different angles here. Right, so let's make some changes just to the front here, just to add a little bit more interest. So I'll make a new layer, and I'm going to call this one solid bronze. And I will choose this bronze material here, and you can go in with my polygon paint tool again, and I'm going to go in, let's move this one out of the way over here, and I'm just going to make these here, these ones, a bronze color, so something like that. And I'll do the same on the doorway. Okay, so that's that done, and we'll just do the tops of these here. I'm not bothering with the back faces of these. Again, it's not really a texturing tutorial, but yeah, so something like that. So I've got those main elements in there. Okay, so same technique here, because can you see that we've got this texture from the sandstone still poking through on here? So I will go to my smooth outer layer here. I will choose clipping mask on here, and I will choose solid bronze as my clipping mask. So those areas that I've just painted in, and then I will invert that. And now you can see that they're nice and smooth. So it should be smooth on all of these. Okay, so there is a little bit there down there, and that's because of one of the other layers, probably the base layer, but I'm okay with that. It's fine for now. All right, so we've got those done. What I need to do now is just paint some details on, really. So I'll choose a different brush, and let's see. I'll make sure my solid bronze layer is now selected, and make sure that I've got my normal channel open on there. In fact, I could just only use the normal channel. I don't really need anything else, but let's just go with it. And I'll just make some random shapes. Now, again, it's not something I'm that interested in at this point in terms of the design on here. I'm just going to make some marks on it. So. Okay, something like that. So just so we've got some kind of relief on there that's just not flat. So let's jump over to the render room quickly. Let's put our perspective on. Angle right and hit render, and there you go. So we can see that information on there. It just gives that little bit of detail. And what I'll do is hit symmetry, wait for the save, hit symmetry on there, and now I can sort of do something like this and paint with this bronze material and add that kind of detail on the front. Again, it's really up to you as to how much you want to detail this, and obviously increasing and decreasing the brush size adds a little bit of variation to the design that you're going to do on here. If you imagine it's kind of like a vine leaf type of thing or sort of a tree design, spreading out underneath this extruded part of the building, almost like supporting it. Completely freehand. I'm not really looking at anything, no design reference, so it's just trying to put something together. Okay, so that'll do. And let's have a look around, see if there's any more. I mean, we can draw extra details on here. The temptation is to kind of really keep going with this, but I think you get the idea. So let's move on then and have a look at the back here. And what I want to do is just make this roof section a little bit more interesting because it's kind of a little bit dull. So I've got another smart material here, this brick one, and I'm going to just use this. Obviously you can find these materials anywhere, these sort of brick materials, and just make your own smart material. If you don't know how to do that, I'll do a tutorial on that at some point, but for now let's just block this in. So my material is selected here. I'm going to change my mapping over to UV mapping on this one. I'll use the scale to get the size of the bricks roughly the way that I want to. Now the reason I'm using UV mapping on this, if I just jump over to cube mapping and scale this one, you can see that the bricks kind of are going in a horizontal way, and I don't really want that. I want them to kind of like follow this square shape around. So when I UV mapped this, we separated these out, if you remember, and that will help me with this. So let me just scale this back to how it was. You can see that they've got this sort of, they follow the square around. So that's why having these different mapping options really helps, because you can sort of change things around and get things the way you want it to look. That'll do for now. That's about the size of the brick that I want. Jump back over to the polygon tool. I'll make a new layer here and call it roof brick. I was tempted to do tiles, but I don't think it looks that good in terms of the design of this thing. Okay, so that's fine as it is. And I quite like this brick texture here, so I'm going to go on the inside now. Let's jump over to the inside, and I'm going to swap this over now to cube map. I'll just call this brick for now, and I'm going to, that's a little bit, let's undo that. I need to just change the scale now. Now I'm moving on this one. Move it a little bit larger, something like that. That's fine. I'm going to just drop this layer in here, this texture. Obviously with the cube mapping, I'm getting this nice follow through with the bricks as it's wrapping around this wall, almost giving you the impression that, you know, it was built in layers as it would have been, and using these different types of bricks, it kind of works. Although it does look as if it's repeating a bit, but I'm going to break that up soon anyway, so that's not going to affect. So going to the front of the building, we can see now that we can kind of look inside. So let's jump over to our render room again. So now you can see I'm dropping into the render room a lot more because I'm checking the work a lot more in terms of how these things are looking. So if we drop inside this, we're getting the light coming through and hitting those bricks, which isn't looking too bad. The harsh transition here between the brick and this ceiling doesn't look too good, so might change that. And then on the exterior, let's just have a quick look at that extra vine work that we did on there. Yeah, it doesn't look too good because it's kind of dark, but I'm going to leave it in. At other angles, it might look a little bit better if it was anime. There you go. That looks a little bit better there. Really depends on the angle and the lighting, of course. What I'm going to do on this final part to create the internal areas of this temple is just use this same old bronze smart material that I've got here, and also create a new layer for it. And in the same way, I'm going to make sure that my brick layer here is set to a clip mask. And on this one, I'm just going to use the brush tool and draw out roughly between this layer of bricks here and this one here. And I'm just going to place some of that material inside just to help the interior a little bit in terms of interest. So I can use this tool here and I'll draw across using the line of bricks really as a guide, and just draw down to here, something like that, and close that off. So that will fill that area there for me with this bronze material. And I can just go around now and continue and do the same thing. Because I've got my cube mapping set, I can just go around and kind of like follow that line of bricks around, making sure I'm coming up to around about here, and just filling that area in. Obviously I can't get right into the corners, but I can go and tidy that up afterwards. And I'll just repeat that now, so I'll just finish it off and then come back to you afterwards. Okay, so with that done now, you can see there's the sort of internal areas finished off. I'll just go over to the render room. Let's just check out the render, see what it's looking like. I suspect it may be a little bit too deep on the wall. Not too bad. One last thing I want to do on this is just to put something down on the floor, as it's looking a little bit bare at the moment. So what I'll do is I'll try to put down some tiles or some sort of mosaic type of thing on the floor. Now I haven't got a specific smart material for like a mosaic type pattern, but I'll just use a floor tile, and yeah, because it'll do for now. I'm going to bring up the textures and text UV editor here, and instead I'll start to paint in a 2D way on this floor object, on this floor UV space here. So at this point I'll select my floor tiles that I'm going to use, and it's this one here. And with that one selected, I'll just make sure I get my properties box here. So moving my floor plane here into view, I'll choose the circle tool here. Make sure my depth is on, my specular, and let's just make a circle on here. Hold shift down to adjust, and when you're kind of happy with where it's going to be, just release, and then we get something like that. You can see here in the main 3D window where that's going to be. Now it doesn't really matter, this doesn't, it's not, doesn't need to be perfect, but at this point I can come in and change this tool over, and let's choose something like this rectangle tool here, and I'll just mark around these corner pieces and just give a little bit of an indication that there's some tiles around the edge as well. Okay, so once that's done and that floor element is in there, I'm going to just very quickly jump over to the eraser tool. I'll use a brush and change my alpha to this one, and I can go in now and just start to erase these out and make it look a little bit more rough around the edges, as if this kind of sand is going over the top. And I won't use that brush actually. I'll try and use this drag brush, and I can either sort of drag more of these out on here like this and sort of fill some of these spots in here. And then I'll go in with the eraser tool here, and using the same drag brush here, I'll just pull some of these away and fade them out a little bit on the edges. Okay, so that's enough for this. What I'll do now is just close this window down, close the material down as well, just to reassess how it looks. That's not too bad. Let's get our renderer, go over to our render room rather. So at this point I'll just try the screen illumination, screen space illumination on here, just to have a look, just to check. Possibly could have made them a little bit bigger, but that's fine. Okay, so let's turn those off. Let's go back to the paint room. And one last thing to finish off on the exterior here is going to be a little bit more weathering on the actual exterior. And I don't mean the weathering as in the erosion of the sandstone, more to do with just water erosion. And to do that, we'll go back to our smart materials here, and there's a category called leaks. And if you click on the leaks one, I'm just going to make a new layer and call this one leaks, for want of a better word, and change my brush. And I'm going to put the leaks on. So this will give me a preview. This is where the preview is just going to help me a little bit. It'll take a little bit of time for it to materialize onto my model. Let's have a look here. We can move this over, bring this down, move it around. Just needs to be kind of vertical to the building. So at this point, let's bring this one back in. Just check that out. So I don't want all of it. You can see on the interior section down here that it's kind of like completely obliterated the whole lot and with that. So I don't really want all of it. So what I can do is just close this one down, and using that layer and my brush, I can start to paint that where I actually want it. So round here, for example, and just paint some of these leaks in. And that should be okay for that. And there is a couple of other things I just want to try out. So I'll make a new layer just to keep everything nice and separate. I'll start off by just calling this concave, and I'm going to jump over to my stone, and here I've got two materials that I've set up which just utilize the cavity map here, and what it does is it'll just give me a little bit of colorization in the crevices of this object. You can see it's just putting some kind of like sand into the corners, which doesn't look too bad. So again, I can just use that and just sort of paint in where I want that to be. So I'll just change my brush over, just a nice soft brush on this, and just paint those elements in. It just adds that little bit extra. Okay, and in the same way now, I'll just choose a convex, and this will create a kind of like a wearing on the edges, and it's just a color effect really. You can see, change my brush over here so it's not so uniform. Just pick that one again and just dab this one on here, just to put some extra wear and tear on those edges, and it kind of just takes that edge off a little bit and just distracts the eye from those corner pieces. what I might do here is just drop the whole thing down a little bit, 60% of the opacity. I don't think it's doing a great lot. Okay, so there we go. We've kind of like completed the texturing process. You may have noticed that I do have my ambient occlusion map on here as well, and if I turn that layer on, why I've taken that off is basically because it kind of makes the whole interior look a little bit too dark. I can erase that and sort of move that out, but I'm not going to just yet. I'll see how this final how this looks in the final render inside of Blender, and I can reduce that down inside of Blender. So over to the render room. The next stage, we'll be taking this into Blender and we'll do some better lighting scenarios in there and render some shots out. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.